Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Fernand, for mentioning me and other colleagues along the way. First and foremost, dear colleagues, let me start by saying thank you. As a father, we wouldn't have his daughter of 35 years alive without your work. As a patient representative of 30 million people affected by rare disease in Europe, but also, if I may, today exceptionally on behalf of patients and consumers in Europe, thank you. Thank you to the European Medicines Agency, its directors, its board members, its staff, the thousands of experts involved, the national agencies, the European Commission, and the member states' regulators. Thanks to you, you enabled science to translate into innovative human medicinal products, treatments, and vaccines, transforming public health, transforming healthcare for all citizens in the EU, transforming our life. We can be all proud of it, and maybe today is a moment of pride. My talk will be in two parts, the benefit from patient perspective and the engagement of patients. First, the population at large and patients have benefited from these 30 years of European regulatory framework. The body of the EU legislations and policies has enhanced the collaboration between the member states' regulators, but also between regulators and stakeholders at large. Companies, scientists, clinicians, patients, consumers, healthcare professionals. We, as patients, as population, we directly benefit from a European common scientific advice, from a European common benefit risk assessment, from a European common pharmacovigilance, and much more. Collaborating at the European level has enabled to work with the best experts in Europe, whatever their nationality, and to pool their expertise to our benefit. Thanks to this European framework, we also all benefit from a more robust scientific, ethical development and assessment, and overall, from a common culture of collaboration, of quality, and evidence-based decision, in particular, focusing on clinical evidence, and pursuing both excellence and public interest. The European regulatory framework and the EMA, I would argue, are a high-value public good. It brings more equality to the citizens in Europe. In its absence, we would have more inequalities of expertise, of assessments, of decisions, and availability across the territories of EU. And my second message on that part of the benefits is that looking back at the 30 years, patients in Europe have benefited from legislations and policies targeted at specific populations. The regulatory on orphan medicinal products, 1999, the regulatory of pediatric use of medicines, 2006, and I would say also the regulation on advanced therapy medicines in 2007. These three regulations have promoted the European Commission and EMA at the forefront of the two world leaders with the FDA. The regulations have enabled to address high unmet medical need, and I'm pleased to see that ambition in the new revision of the pharmaceutical legislation. It has enabled to steer scientific and medical advancement, to attract both public and private investment in the development of therapies, to build clinical research infrastructures, which is so critical for the coming years for attractiveness and competitiveness, and to develop new clinical trial design and statistical methods. And overall, these regulations of specific populations have core elements of the European ecosystem for clinical trials and biotech. So while we are preparing the Biotech Act and revising potentially the clinical directive, we should pay attention to the specific regulations. They are building blocks benefiting to health needs beyond the rare and the pediatric, and also health priorities at large. Through these regulations targeted to specific population, our society, meaning EU and member states, provide additional efforts to people with special needs who are more vulnerable in our society. By doing so, they create more equity. When Europe delivers more equality, and better equity, driven by public interest, it delivers on its hope. And there are important secondary aspects coming along the way. This European regulatory framework not only built the great European agency that we are proud of, the EMA, but also builds a resilient, decentralized network of national agencies with the head of medicine agencies mentioned by Fernand a moment ago, making each national regulatory agency stronger, particularly in the specific population, I would argue, and I hope they will not lose that with the new pharmaceutical legislation, and offering inspiring model for Africa, for instance, like was just mentioned. Because the European regulatory framework is anchored into the European market integration, it is a powerful steer for European scientific collaboration, for converging member states' health research agenda, and for a growing EU health research program and EU public health program, and I hope this will continue in the next MFF. Overall, more research, more infrastructures, more clinical trials, more competences, more investment, a culture of collaboration and excellence. And in fine, more medicines, as you mentioned, Emer, over 400 approved at the EU level in a more robust, reliable, predictable system, also more fair, and much better than if it had been fragmented in 27 national frameworks. So when Europe delivers meaningful progress to its citizens, it delivers on its hope. But I also have a message of concerns. You know me, I cannot escape that, right? Concerns when looking at the next decade. First, the European Union lacks strategic alignment based on the long-term and global vision. Too many, if not most, of our legislations and policies over the last 30 years and even in the last 10 or 15 years have been developed with specific goals at specific moments, which is great and we can understand. But piling up legislations and creating silos with inconsistencies and inefficiencies, overall, we're losing opportunities. I hope that the new strong momentum for EU competitiveness and attractiveness at the global level, with an alignment at this moment between the Commission and the European Parliament, and hopefully a majority of member states, will address this vital issue. The revision of the pharmaceutical legislation, together with the Critical Medicine Act, the Life Science Strategy, and the Biotech Act, are a great opportunity. But there is also the possible revision of the diagnostic legislation, of the clinical trial directive, and then the cross-border directive. And I know it's a lot of work to swallow in only 5 years, but we need that alignment in order to reach the strategic outcome that we're looking for. The second is the initial ambition that all patients in the EU could benefit as equitably as possible from the very best treatment. It's still not a reality. Still not a reality. The last 30 years have not sufficiently addressed the slow and unequal and illegal access to patients for patients to medicines in Europe. We know why. We had plenty of work and assessment and conferences around that and work. We know what to do, and we know it is difficult. But this is paramount for the next years. Competitiveness is not only about bringing this strategy together, it's about at the end making sure that every patient has access where it lives at the right moment to the medicines. Europe needs to do that to show that it delivers health for its citizens. Streamlining also regulatory and HTA advice and assessment, and improving decision-making on pricing and reimbursement through more collaboration at the European level is essential for the innovative therapies of tomorrow. It will not work through the fragmentation of 27 member states. It will be an announced disaster, particularly for the most advanced therapies and the personalized medicines. Lots of progress are being made. I know the efforts, and that's fantastic. But we need to go faster and further, and with the proper funding for this agency and also for the European HTA in order to have the proper collaboration, but also collaboration with payers, or I would prefer to call them the buyers, as being critical. And my third message on looking forward is really some specific population, if I can call it like that, which are still forgotten Women health, and I'm pleased there was an intervention later today on that. Women health. I mean, we're discussing that since so much time. What are we doing to address the specific needs? And I will add aging population. We're talking about the pediatrics. Good, but what about the aging use of medicines? My second part will be faster on patient engagement. The European regulatory framework and EMA have pioneered, I would really argue, you have pioneered stakeholder engagement and active participation of patients' representatives into the scientific committees and into the EMA scientific procedures and the EMA management board. The first meeting of patients goes back to 1996 between the CHMP and AIDS advocate for meeting on HIV, and that was followed in 97, 98, 99, and if I may mention, François Houillet, my colleague former colleagues from UORDES, being the lead advocate with colleagues, but also Jean-Michel Alexandre, who was mentioned, Fernand Sauer. It was thanks to them that this was made possible, and opening the door then to a change in the regulation with the orphan drug regulation. And that came in 2000, when the first 3 patient representatives were appointed, including myself, and then having elections as vice chair. It was not a given. We had 6-1, 6-2, I think, something like that. What I'm proud of is that 3 years later it was unanimous. So it shows that there is some value, some time that we participate, right? And I'd like to mention Josep Torrent Farnell, the first chairman of this committee, and all the chairmen of this committee, including Bruno and Violeta, who are here today, was fantastic chairman, but also all the patient advocates over the years who are contributing their personal time and efforts with huge work. Today, there is patient representative, as you may know, all of you, pediatric committee, in the Committee of Advanced Therapies, in the Pharmacovigilance Committee, and have patients as full members and voting rights. But it's not easy, you know, it's a lot of work, and you don't get much support to do it. And it's important to be more than one in the room. And each year, there are now over 1,000 participation of patients in scientific committees, in scientific procedures, working group in the EMA, and I would like to say thank you for that too. Scientific publications, with EMA being a co-author, shows that there is a scientific value of having patient involvement, having an impact on the scientific outcome. The first meeting in 2002, 2003 of patients' representatives here was organized to form the Patient Consumer Working Group, which became, a few years later, the Working Party of Patients and Consumers. And the regretté Noël Vathion was behind that with Patrick Lecourtois, which may be with us today, and Nikos Dedes as the first chairman. In doing so, the EMA has been ahead, and I would like to insist on that, ahead of the FDA. FDA has created the very interesting patient focus group, and I think we should take lessons of that. There is some very good outcome of that. But also the patient engagement committee of the FDA is patterned on the experience of EMA, but is not delivering as good. And FDA has more public hearing, yes, but you have a lot of lobbying around these hearings. But EMA, what the EMA does better and more than the FDA, and should claim it more, I would argue. Stakeholder engagement over the years has brought quality information, transparency, prevention of potential competing interests, and public debates. EMA and the European regulatory framework are trusted. Even in crises like the reintroduction of thalidomide, it was trusted thanks to the intervention of patient representatives as diplomats into that effort. Trust and name recognition has increased with the COVID crisis, but trust cannot be taken for granted, as Fernand mentioned. Social media, fake news, devalorization of institutions and of science are real risks. And EMA is taking the very good steps in that direction to try to address these challenges, and the network of stakeholders engagement is a crucial asset. My last message in looking forward and conclusion is that there is the ongoing pharma legislation review, and as patient organization, we do support this new legislation. But the patient representation and civil society may be strongly undermined during the trilogue. The European Commission proposal is good, and proposing 4 patient representatives and 4 alternate with voting rights. European Parliament is supporting having them, these 4 representatives, in the CHMP and in the PRAC, in the Pharmacovigilance Committee. But some member states are reluctant and opposing for now. So I encourage you to reach to your representative of member states in the European relevant group supporting the Council and the Trilogue, and advocate to have the patients there. And why that? Because meaningful patient engagement with voting rights is important to be real and credible, not just witness and actors into committees, but to be colleagues engaged in a co-work with the other colleagues from the agencies, to have the patient organizations and patient reps to act and work in a responsible manner. That's important. If you want them in the next 20 years to play in a responsible manner as individuals and as organizations, give them the same responsibilities. And to enhance the trust of the public, to bring the democratic process, transparency and trust at the core of the expertise. I hope the member states will be wise to enable the European Medicines Agency to continue to lead in that regard in the world. Thank you very much.